Hello everyone, welcome to Telerik UI for Blazor video series. My name is Fahad and I'll be going through some of the basic features of Telerik's ListView component. I have 10 years of experience in .NET. I love learning about new technologies and recently I've started teaching programming online. You can find my YouTube channel or Twitter handle by searching QS Drive, or you can send me an email at qsdrive@gmail.com. So to learn about Telerik's ListView component, I've added Publishers page in my Bookstores app. But instead of showing publishers in an HTML table, I would like to use Telerik's ListView component. We'll talk about how we can add templates to customize items in our ListView component. We'll also talk about header template and footer template. In header template, we can add some controls to customize the component, and in footer template, we can show the number of items in the list. We'll also talk about how we can give user options to enable or disable paging for the component, and they can also set the page size for the component. Then we'll talk about how user can add, edit, or delete items from the list. And you can see that if after saving or editing item, the state for the city gets loaded, that means we'll talk about the value changed event for the drop-down list in the edit template. You can also handle the OnEdit event of your ListView component. That means you can have control over the components in the edit template. We'll also talk about cancel event, on cancel event, so that you can get out of the edit mode for your ListView component. We'll also talk about how you can filter and sort items in the list, and you can see that the paging works just fine after filtering and sorting items in the list. We'll also talk about server-side paging. That means you don't have to load the whole list. When you initialize the component, you can bring in data by the page and assign it to your ListView component so that user doesn't really have to wait for the whole data to get loaded into the component. So let's first check out how this demo app is set up, and then we'll use the same code base for using Telerik's ListView component. For demo, I'm going to use Publishers page in my Bookstores application. This page is pretty simple. I'm calling a web API to get publishers information and showing that information on an HTML table. And then I have delete button right next to them where I can delete those publishers from the list. I can also create new publishers. I can say new publisher, and then I can select a city and save it, and that publisher gets added into the list. And this data is persisted into system so that you can see that it stays the same. Okay, so instead of using these controls, I would like to use ListView, Telerik's ListView component to perform all the CRUD operations. So let's go ahead and see how the code base is set up for this so that we can use our ListView component on top of this code base. Okay, for that, I'm gonna go to my Razor component, and you can see that I'm taking publisher's name in a text box. I'm taking publisher city in a drop-down list, and I'm calling create publishers on save button, which will create publisher into system. And then I'm looping through publisher list, which will show all the publishers information, which we are calling from a web API, but we are using HTML table to show the information. And then we have this delete button, which will call delete publisher. This is also a web API, which will call delete publisher to delete the publisher from the system. Let's go ahead and check the code behind. On initialize, I'm calling load publishers, which is using HTTP client to make a web API call to get the publishers from the system. Let's go ahead and see the server project and how that is set up. So I'm going to go to my publisher controller into my server project. And whenever I call get publisher, you can see that it's using a Bookstores repository to get publishers from the system. And if I go to my startup class, Bookstores repository is added as a singleton service into my project. And if I go to the definition of this class, and that's where we are holding the information of publishers and authors into the system. Okay. And you can see that this is a singleton reference, so that this information stays the same until you kill the application. The reason why we have set up the project like this, so that you guys can clone the project. This project is going to be on GitHub. You can clone the project and run out of the box, and it'll run just fine. You're not going to need any database setup for running this application. And yeah, that's how we are going to use this application. We're going to use this project for adding list view component into onto our page. Let's see how save and delete button is set up. I'm gonna go to my Blazor component for that, and create publisher is calling post as JSON async function and creating publisher. If I go to my controller, you can see that we are calling create publisher, which will add a publisher into our publisher list, which we are holding in our bookstores repository. And then we are also calling delete publisher, which will delete the publisher from our list, and that's how we are persisting the data. Okay. So in the next section, I'm gonna use all these functions and web API methods to call CRUD operations whenever I use list view component, Telerik's list view component onto my page. Okay. So instead of using this HTML table to show our publisher list, I would like to use Telerik's list view component to show this list on my page. For that, I'm going to get rid of this HTML table. Instead of that, I'm going to use a list view component. And here I'll have to pass data, otherwise this is going to throw error. So I'm going to pass data as publisher list because that's what we would like to populate on the screen. And we'll also have to pass template as render fragment parameter into our list view component. Otherwise, this is going to throw an exception. Let's remove this and see what exception we get. I'm going to rerun my project and go to my browser. And when I refresh the page, you can see that it's throwing an exception. It will throw an exception saying that, your list view item is not set to a reference. You will get a null reference exception. So we'll have to pass template, and that should get rid of that exception. So I can say template, which will initialize our list view. And when I rerun this, that should get rid of that exception. So when I refresh my page, you can see that the error is gone. We don't have any exceptions anymore. And this template is a render fragment parameter. That means it can take any HTML we can pass any HTML to show our list view item. So to access the item into my template, we'll have to use context. So let's go ahead and add a paragraph and say context. And when I hit dot, I will get all the properties of my publisher here. And I can use any of these properties to show it on as my list view item. So I'm going to say publisher name, and let's go ahead and rerun this and see how that looks. And go to my browser and refresh my page, and you can see our publisher's name is showing on our list here. You can also name your context. I can say that context, and I would like to name it as publisher because it makes more sense. And then I can replace the context with publisher, and that should work just fine. I can also add paragraphs here, as this is just HTML block. I can say publisher dot, I would also like to show the city of the publisher, and I would like to show publisher state too. So I'm going to say publisher state and publisher city, and then rerun my project. I'm going to refresh my browser, and you can see that it's showing the publisher name and the city and the state of the publisher. Okay. So this publisher list is not looking great, and I'm gonna take some help from Bootstrap to make my item look a little nicer. So I'm gonna go and copy this card title, which has an image in the left side, and it has some text and some footer to it. So I'm gonna copy this HTML block and then replace it in my template, and use that instead of using the HTML that I added. So I'm going to make some changes into this. I'm going to say that I'm going to remove the style. I don't want this. I can get rid of that. I'm going to set this as 2 columns so that it looks a little nicer. And then in the card title, I'm going to show publisher's name. So I'm going to say publisher dot publisher name, and I'm going to make the font size a little bolder, font weight bolder, so that it looks nicer. And I'm going to say that this is card subtitle, it's not card text. And here, instead of showing this text, I'm going to show publisher city and publisher state. I'm going to say publisher city, comma, publisher state. Okay. And I'm going to keep this text the same, and let's run this and see how this looks. So I'm going to stop the project, rerun it. And I'm going to refresh my page. And now my list looks much nicer. This image is not showing because we don't have that image anymore right now, but we can set that image. So let's go ahead and set that image. But look at this, how nice my HTML block looks and how the list items are looking. So I'm going to go to my component and I'm going to set an image here. I already have an image, which is Telerik's image, and I can set this as image Telerik JPG, and that should work just fine. Let's run this and see how this looks. I'm going to refresh my page and my image starts showing up on my list. Okay. But you can also use string interpolation to manipulate your string and have different images on your list. I just have one image showing for all the items, but you can use string interpolation like this. You can say that I want to manipulate the string, and instead of using just Telerik, you can manipulate your string by passing publishers, by passing an item from publisher. You can have image URL here. I don't have it, but you can totally do that too. Okay. All right. So this is how you can use template. You can also use header template and footer template. Header template will show it on top of the list. So I can say that header template, and I can pass a strong HTML element. I can say strong HTML element. I'm gonna set the style to make the font size a little larger so that it looks nicer. I'm gonna say larger, and I'm gonna say these are the best publishers in USA, and I can also have footer template. I can say footer template, and then I can also pass the strong element, but I'm gonna have a different text there. So I can say total count of the publisher. I can say total count of the publishers is equal to @publisher.count publisher list. Nice. Okay, let's run this and see how this looks. So I'm gonna stop the project, rerun it, refresh my page. And you can see that it shows the best publishers in USA, and it shows total count 13 because there are 13 items in the list. And that's how you can use header template, and customize your list view items the way you want it. I can also have dark theme for my card if I want to. So if I say text is white, but background is dark, then that will change my my theme for my card. So if I rerun my project and refresh my page, you can see that now I have dark theme for my list view items. And you can, like I said, you can use string interpolation to manipulate this depending on what user has selected, and that way you can have good UI experience. Okay. In the next section, I'm going to talk about how you can use paging and how you can make the list view component pageable and set page size, and how you can handle page change events. So that's something that I'm going to talk about in the next section. To enable paging for your list view component, the only thing that you need to do is set pageable property to true, and paging gets enabled for your list view component. You can see that currently I don't have paging enabled for my list view component. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go to my list view component, and here I'm going to set pageable property to true. And that's all I need to do to get paging enabled for my list view component. The default value of the page size is 10, but you can change that to whatever you like. I'm going to change it to 5 so that my list view component looks nicer. Let's run this and see how it looks. I'm going to go to my browser. And now you can see that I have paging enabled for my list view component. There are 3 pages because there are total 13 items. You can see there are 5 items on each page, and there's 3 items on the last page. But these are just parameters, like if I go to my list view component, pageable is set to true and page size is 5. You can bind this to other components and have more control over this list view component. You can give your users option to set pageable property to true or false. You can give them option to set the page size to. So what I want to do is I want to add a checkbox, which we'll call as enable paging. And whenever you check that checkbox, that's when paging will get enabled. And whenever you unselect it, that's when paging will get disabled. For that, I'm gonna go to my header template, and here I'm gonna add a break line so that it looks a little nicer. And then I'm gonna add div tag, which will have column 12 row. And then here I'm gonna add a label. That label is going to say enable paging, and then I'm gonna add a checkbox which will be bound to pageable property of my list view component. So I'm gonna add a checkbox which will be Telerik checkbox. So I'm gonna say Telerik checkbox and then bind the value to a property that we will create. I'm gonna bind a value to paging property, which is going to be a Boolean property, and same thing I'm going to assign it to my pageable property for list view component. Let's go ahead and create this property. So I'm going to go to my code, and here I'm going to create a property. I'm going to create a property which is going to be Boolean, and this is going to be paging, and by default I'm going to set it to true so that it so we don't have to check enable paging every time we load the page. And one more thing that I want to do, I want to make this label a little nicer, so I'm going to set this style for font size to large and font weight to bold, okay, so that it looks a little nicer. Sweet. Let's run this and see how it looks. I'm gonna run the project and I'm gonna refresh my page. And now I have this checkbox which is already checked, and paging is already enabled for my list view component. And whenever I uncheck it, you can see that the paging gets disabled. Paging goes away for my list view component. And you can give this option to your user. Your user can have the option of enabling paging for your list view component. Okay, and same thing that you can do with page size too. So let's say I want to add a drop down which will be list of page size options, and user can select whatever page size they want to select. So for that, I'm gonna copy this, and then I'm gonna instead of saying enable paging, I'm gonna say page size, and here instead of adding a checkbox, I'm gonna add a drop down list. So I'm gonna say Telerik drop down list, and here I can set data to list of integers. That means I want to give option to my user. So I'm gonna say that this is going to be page size options. We don't have this integer list. We're going to create that, and then I'm going to bind it to an integer property which we haven't created yet. So we will create that once we are done setting this. I'm going to set this to page size option, and so whatever gets bound to this drop down list, that's what I would like to pass it as page size. So I'm going to copy this and set it to page size here. Okay, and we're gonna, like I said, we'll have to add the list of integers, and we'll have to add another property which will catch the page size option. And I've already done that, so I'm going to copy some code from my notepad and put it in here, which is integer array, and which is page size options, which will have 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 as page size options. And then there is integer, which is page size option. And I have set it to 5. The reason why I set it to 5 is because if you don't set this to anything, this is going to be 0. And the same page size will get applied to list view component, and page size 0 doesn't really make sense and it throws an exception, so I have already set it to 5. Okay, let's run this and see how this looks like. I'm gonna set the column size to 3 so that it looks nicer. Cool. All right, let's run this and see how it looks. I'm gonna refresh the page, and now you can see that I have this page size option, and I have 2, 3, 4, 5, and 10, and by default 5 was set in the drop down. Okay, but if I change the page size here, you can see that that gets affected to our list view component. Now the page size of our list view component is 2, and there are 7 pages on the page. Okay, and I can change it to 3, I can change it to 4, and it has that immediate effect on my list view component. And same, even the number of pages which are showing on the list view component changes whenever you change the page size. Okay, so that's all about how you can enable paging and set page size. Another thing that I wanted to talk about is page changed event. Page changed event gets called whenever you change the page, and if you want to have control over that, you can do that too. So let's go ahead and create that, handle that event. So I'm going to say that this event will be handled by this method, which is going to be page changed handler. We'll have to create that method. So let's go ahead and create that method. I'm gonna go to my code, and here I'm gonna create a method, private void page changed event handler, and you can set properties here or whatever you would like to do. So what I want to do is whenever I change the page, I want to tell my user which page they are on. So I'm going to need a string property. So I'm going to create a new property, which is going to be string property. And the name of the property is going to be page changed message. Okay. And I'm going to set this message in my handler. I'm going to set page change message is going to be you are on page something. So this, whenever you call this event, the event callback sends a parameter which is going to be the current index of the page. That means we can get the current page number. So I can say get current page number from here, and same thing, I'm gonna attach it to my string so that we can populate that on the screen. So I'm gonna say current page number. So you can see the message is going to be you are on this page number. Okay, and we'll have to populate this to on our screen. So let's go ahead and create another label, another div tag. So I'm gonna say another div tag, and here instead of showing this, I'm gonna show page changed message. Okay, so whenever the page changes, we call this handler, and this handler sets this message so that we can know which page we are on. Okay, so let's run this and go to our browser, and I'm going to refresh the page. And whenever I change the page, you can see that you're on page 2, you're on page 3. I can change the page size, and then you can see that it changes whenever I change the page. One thing that I want you to notice is if I change the page size here to 10, then also it shows the message as you're on page 7, but you are on actually page 2. The reason why that's happening is because when you change this drop down, you're not actually calling page change event handler. You're not calling, that method is not getting called, and that's why this message is not getting populated. So you'll have to be careful in how you're setting up your list view. Okay, that's all about paging. In the next section, I'm going to talk about edit templates, in which we'll talk about how we can add, edit, and delete items from our list. Okay. To add, create, update, delete functionality in our list view component, we'll have to handle on create, on update, and on delete events for that list view component. I'm going to get started with adding a delete button, which will delete item from my list. And then I'll add an edit button, which will let me update the item in the list. And then I will add an add button, which will let me add a new item into my list. Okay. So let's first check if we have a web API call, a method, which will be called whenever I delete the item from the system. For that, I'm going to go to my code, and you can see that I have this delete publisher method, which is calling a web API and passing publisher ID into it so that we can delete that publisher. So we'll have to call this method on delete event of our list view component. So for that, I'm going to say on delete event, we would like to call delete publisher. Okay. Now we want this event to get fired. We want this event to get fired on a button click, and for that I'm going to go to my template. I'm going to go to my template because we are going to add a button in the template, right? So I'm going to go to my template, and here I'm going to add a button. I'm going to add a button. So I'm going to say div class column md2, and then I'm gonna add a break line so that it looks nicer. And here I'm gonna add a button, but this is not going to be a Telerik button, it's going to be a list view command button. The difference is that we can have command into our list view command button, and that way our component knows which event to fire whenever this button is clicked. And I want the delete event to get called, and that's why I'll pass delete as parameter into my command. And then we can set the text as delete. We can also set an icon to our button. I can say icon, and we can get from icon name, and we can set it to delete. And that will look nicer. Okay, so whenever I click on this button, it will call this delete publisher, but this delete publisher should know which publisher to delete, right? So let's go to a delete publisher, and here this method, now that I've mapped this method to an event, that event callback sends list view command event arguments as parameter, so we can catch that. So I can say list view command event arguments, and I can catch that. And this list view command argument has the item that we're working on, so I can get that item as this way, and I can convert that item into the class, and we can catch that into a variable. I can say var publisher is equal to list view command event argument dot item as publisher, and the same publisher will be passed for deleting the publisher. Okay, let's run this and see how this is working. So I'm going to rerun my project. It failed for some reason because we missed a semicolon. Let's rerun this again. Okay, so I'm going to refresh my page, and you can see that now we have this delete button on each and every page, right? So I'm going to go and click on this, and whenever I click on it, you can see that it's deleting items from the list. You can see the list is going down, the number of items, the count is going down. Okay, that's how you can add a delete functionality to your list view component. Now I want to add update functionality. I want to be able to edit my items in the list, and then towards the end we'll add functionality. Okay, so whenever I click on, I'm going to put a button here which will be edit, and whenever I click on this edit button, it should show an interface where we can edit these items, right? So let's go ahead and first add that button. That button is going to be another list view command button. So I'm going to copy this and paste it here, but this command is going to be edit because we want our list view component to show edit template. Whenever I click on this button, I want it to show an interface which will let us update our publisher item. So I'm gonna say this is going to be edit, and this is going to be edit. This is going to be edit. So whenever I click on it, it should show an edit interface. So for adding that edit interface, we'll have to add edit template. So we'll have to add edit template, and edit template is going to be very similar to template. The only difference is going to be The only difference is going to be we will be taking input from the user instead of just showing the input, right? So I'm going to name my context the same so that it's going to be same, and then I'm going to copy my template. I'm going to copy my template and paste it here, and instead of showing the information, we'll be taking information, right? So for that I have I'm going to add a text box and a drop down list here. So I'm going to add a text box and drop down list. This will be taking information for publisher name, and the drop down list will load all the cities and will let us select the city for the publisher whenever we are trying to update the publisher. Okay. So so this is where we're going to update, this is where we are going to edit our publisher, right? So, and we don't need this edit and delete button in edit template, we need a save button here, right? So I'm going to remove this one of the commands, and here I'm gonna add save button. So whenever I click on save, this should get saved, whatever changes that we're making should get saved in the system, and this is going to be save, and I'm going to name it as save too. Okay. So whenever I click on this button, whenever I click on this list view command button, it fires on update events. So I'm going to say on update event, and here I would like to update my publisher. So I already have this publisher update publisher method. I can go to that method and say go to definition, and you can see that this is where we are updating the publisher. We're passing the publisher ID and the updated publisher so that system can update the publisher, right? But just like delete, we're going to need the list view command argument into our update publisher too. So I'm gonna need that publisher that I want to update, and I can get it from list view command event arguments. Okay, let's run this and see how this is working. So I'm gonna stop the server, rerun it, go back to the browser, refresh the page, and now you can see that we have this edit button now, and I have delete too. I'm going to click on edit, and now you can see that I have these one text box and another is a drop down list which comes filled up. So you can see that this is text and this is New York City, this is BNH Publishing, which is Nashville. So when I click on edit, Nashville is set to the drop down list, and BNH Publishing is set to the text box. And you can update this. You can say that BNH Publisher save, and that gets saved into my database. You can change the city too. I can say that I don't want it to be New York, I want it to be Boston, and save, and that gets saved in the database. Okay, that's how you can update items from your list view component. And for edit, this is what, so for edit we used edit template, right? We use this template for editing the publisher. Now for adding add, so we're going to need an add button here. On that click, we're again going to use edit template, but instead of this being filled up by any item, this will be empty, so we can add new item into our list. So let's go ahead and add that button. So I'm going to go to my header template, and here I'm gonna write next to my page message here, I'm going to add a list view command button. I'm going to say list view command button, and this is going to, the command of this list view command button is going to be add, and the icon, I'm going to set it to @icon name as plus, so that it looks nicer, and then I'm going to say add. Okay, and whenever this button gets called, whenever we click on this button, it will open the edit template. But whenever I save on my edit template, I wanted to call on create method. I wanted to call create publisher method, because update publisher won't work, right? So I'm going to say on create, we would like to call create publisher, which is another method that I've already written. So if I go to this definition, you can see that it's a create publisher method which passes the object publisher to create publisher in the system. But we're going to need that publisher, right? So we're going to need list view command event arguments, and then I'm going to need that publisher into my publisher variable so that I can send it to create publisher here. Okay, so let's run this and see how this is working. So I'm going to rerun my project. This is failing because for some reason 96 3096. So yeah, this publisher won't work. We'll have to get rid of this HTML. We don't need that HTML to show on top of the page. So we don't need this piece, right? Enter publisher information, because we are adding new publisher here. Let's run this now and see if this is working or not. I'm going to read on that. I'm going to refresh my page. Now you can see that the enter publisher information is gone. I do have the add button. So whenever I click on add button, I get a text box, an empty text box, and a drop down list. So I'm going to say new publisher, and then I can select any city. I'm going to select Washington and save it. And that gets saved into my database. I can add a new one. I can say new publisher 2, and then I'm going to select Chicago and save it. And that gets saved into my database, and the count increases. Okay, so that's how you can have add, create, update, delete functionality for your ListView component. In the next section, I'm going to talk about OnEdit and OnCancel event, and I'm going to also talk about, there is one issue here. Like if I click on edit and change my city and save it, you can see the state does not get updated, because publisher does not know what you want to update the state to, so that's something that we're going to handle in the next section. So just like you could handle on create, on update, and on delete event on our ListView component, you can also handle on edit event for them. And this comes in handy whenever you'd like to control the components in your edit template. Let's say I want to keep the dropdown enabled for the first 3 publishers in my list, and after that it's going to be disabled. You can write any logic on those handlers, but I'm going to use this logic to show you how you can use OnEdit event. You can also see that whenever I click on edit, I don't have any close or cancel button to get out of this edit mode. I have to click on save. So we're going to add a cancel button, and which will get us out of this edit mode. And also you can also handle that event. You can also handle on cancel event to log information what was canceled. Okay, so let's first check this on edit event, and then we will work on cancel button. For that, I'm going to go to my component here, and here I'm going to say that I would like to handle on edit event for my ListView component. And the reason why I could handle this event is because I already have this edit button. So whenever I click on this button, this event will get fired, and we're going to map this to our local method, which is going to be edit handler. So let's go ahead and create this method. I'm going to go to my code and create that method. Let's create that method. It's going to be a private method, and it's going to be edit handler. And in here, I can also take the publisher that I'm working on from ListView command event argument. So I can take this as parameter, and then I can get the publisher just like I got it for while I was creating, updating, or deleting the publisher. Okay, and so whenever I click on edit, this function will get called. And depending on which publisher that I'm working on, I would like to disable this drop-down list. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a Boolean property which will enable or disable our drop-down list, which is going to be edit cities. I'm going to create that property into my code. I'm going to say that this is going to be a Boolean property. And this will be true for the first 3 items. So if the publisher dot publisher ID is less than 4, then it's going to be true. Otherwise, it's going to be false. So what we are doing here is whenever I click on edit, it will check which publisher that I'm working on. It will check the publisher ID if it's less than 4. Then I'm going to set this to true, this edit cities Boolean property, which is mapped to the enabled property of my drop-down list. So let's see how this works. So I'm going to stop the project, rerun it. So when I refresh the page, and whenever I click on edit, you can see that I can edit these first 3 items, the drop-down list. But whenever I click on the 4th one, you can see that this is disabled. This is disabled. So if I go to a different page and try to edit, this is disabled. So you could write any logic, depending on the user or, any logic that you would wish, but you can use that on edit event to control the components in your edit template. Okay. Just like I said, you can also add cancel button here. So I'm going to go to my code, and right next to my save button, I would like to add cancel button, which will get me out of the edit mode. And that cancel button is going to be cancel. It's going to be cancel. The icon is going to be cancel, and the text is going to be cancel too. And I don't really need to handle this event to have the cancel button. Cancel button works just fine. So I'm going to run my project and see how that works. So whenever I click on edit button, I have this cancel button now, so I can get out of my edit mode. That's pretty sweet, right? And you get that cancel button on add whenever you'd like to add the item to. So if I cancel that, you get out of it. You don't really have to save a new item. You can get out of it. And like I said, you can handle that event. So I can go to my dropdown. I can go to my ListView component here and can say on cancel. And just like edit handler, I can have cancel handler, and I can handle that event. You can log this information in your database if you don't want. If you want to know what user canceled and what publisher that they were working on, you can write any logic here to save that into database. You can have the publisher that the user is working on. Okay, so that's how you can have on edit and on cancel events. In the last section, we introduced an issue, which was whenever I'm editing my drop down list, and when I save it, you can see the state does not get updated. If I change it to New York City, the state does not get updated. And the reason why that's happening is because we're not assigning anything extra to the state. We're just changing the New York City, but we're not changing the state of our item. So one way to handle this is, you could handle that on create event, on your create event, to take the publisher, assign the state to the publisher depending on what the state is, what the city is. But you'll have to do that in multiple places, on create publisher and on update publisher, right? Instead of that, what you could do, you could have cascading drop down list. I'm not going to add another drop down list, but you could load the state of the publisher that you're working on this value changed event of the drop down list, which is there in your edit template. Let's see how we can do that. So for that, I'm going to go to my drop down list, and I'm going to have a value changed event. I'm going to say that I want to have a value changed event, and this value changed event is going to be a C# function. So I'm going to say value changed handler, which will be called whenever the value of the drop down list is changed. And this takes parameter as the city. So we'll take the value from our drop down list, and we'll pass it into our method here. Okay, and we can also pass the publisher that we are working on. So the publisher, which is going to be the context of the edit template, we can pass that into our handler as parameter so that we can catch it and assign the state for our publisher. And now, as I'm using value changed event, I can't really have bind value. I'll have to use value so that I can show the city, and whenever I change the value, I'll have to assign that city in value changed event. So let's go ahead and create this handler. I'm gonna go to my code here, and I'm gonna add another handler here. I'm gonna say private void, and that's going to be value changed handler. And this will take city as parameter and the publisher which we are working on. So I'm gonna take the city and then the publisher that we are working on. So I can take that publisher, and here I can assign the publisher state by whatever that you like. So I want to assign the state of the publisher by the city which we are receiving, and I've already written a method which is get state from the city, and here I'm going to pass the city that we are actually assigning it to the publisher. And in value changed event, we're not binding the value to the city, right, to the publisher city, so we'll have to assign that city too. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go to my value changed handler here, and set publisher city is equal to the city which is getting passed as value. Okay, so that way I can have the cascading drop down effect, or I can assign values to my publisher, the context, whenever on the value changed events of my drop down list or any control that you're using in edit template. Let's see if this works or not. So I'm gonna go to my I'm gonna rerun my project and then go to my browser and refresh the page. And whenever I editing my drop down list, let's say I want to set it as Dallas and save it, and you can see the state got updated. If I change this to New York City, you can see the state is getting updated now. And that's how you can handle value changed event for the drop down list, and have that cascading effect, or work on the context that you're working on, like on edit event or other events. In the next section, I'm going to talk about OnRead Event, which you can use it for server-side paging. And then I'm going to talk about how you can have custom filtering and sorting for your ListView component. Unlike Telerik's GridView component, you'll have to write your custom logic for handling filtering and sorting for your ListView component. And that's what I've done here. I've already written the code for filtering and sorting, and I'm gonna walk through that code. I'm not gonna write any code in this section so that it's easier for me to explain what's going on here. So you can see that I have mentioned a label here, and then there is this drop down list which says ascending and descending. I'm going to select ascending option, and whenever I click on sort, then you can see that the list gets sorted by publisher name in ascending order. Whenever I select descending and I click on sort, then you can see that the list gets sorted by publisher name in descending order. Let's check the code how this is written. For that, I'm going to go to my my code. One thing that I want you to notice is I've changed the property name from publisher list to all publishers, but everything else is same. The reason why I changed that so that I could explain server-side paging in the next section. But everything else is same. I'm getting all the publisher and assigning it to all publishers, and that's what is mapped to my list view component. Okay, so for sorting, I have added this label which says sort by publisher list, and then I have this drop down list which is mapped to sort direction. This is array of strings. If I go to its definition, then you can see that it has ascending and descending as two options. I'm going to go back to my drop down list component, and here I've bound sort direction as one of the properties in the component to sort direction. And then I have this button which says sort, and whenever I click on the sort button, it calls sort method. Let's go and check the sort method. So when I go to the definition of this method, here I'm using data source request and to data source result. And the reason why I could use that is because I added these two namespaces, Telerik data source and Telerik data source extension. And the reason why I'm using that is because I could easily mention which column that I want to sort by and what's the direction of the sorting, and pass it as request into my extension method, and it gives the result back. Let's walk through this and see how this is written. So I'm creating a request. I'm creating a data source request which has properties, like one of the properties is sorts, and I'm initializing that property. And then if I'm selecting ascending in the drop down, then I'm adding a sort descriptor, which is saying we want to sort by publisher name, and the sort direction should be ascending because that's what we have selected in the drop down. Otherwise, it should be descending. Okay, and this request, I'm passing it in my extension method, which is to data source result. I'm passing it, and it handles that request. It does all the work for us and gives us the data back, and I'm converting that data into list of publisher, and that's what I'm assigning it to all publishers, and that's how it is working. And you can pass this data source request into your server side too. You can handle this on the server side too, and that's what I've done for my filtering. So if I look up by, let's see, if I want to look up by publisher name, and the word in the publisher name should be new, and when I filter, you can see that it pulls up this publisher which has the name new in it, and the count works fine, paging works fine. Let's say if I want to search for publisher which has the letter H, and when I filter, you can see that there are 7 publishers, and then there are 2 pages. I can go to the second page and come back, and then I can also clear filter, and this works fine. And then, it's loading the whole list. Let's check how filtering is working. So for that, I'm gonna go to my component again in the header template. Here I have a text box which is bound to this property filter text that I've created. And then a placeholder which says search by publisher name. I have 2 buttons, one is filter, another is clear filter. Whenever I click on filter, it calls filter. Whenever I click on clear filter, it calls clear filter. Let's go and check how this filter is working. I'm gonna go to the definition of filter. And here I'm doing the same thing. I'm creating a data source request, but instead of selecting sorts, I'm selecting filters. I'm initializing filters as one of the properties in the data source request. And then I'm adding a filter descriptor which says by which column I want to search by, what is the operator that I want to use, and what's the text that I want to filter by. So you don't have to deal with all the logic if you want to filter by. You can use this data source request which has everything in order for you to filter and sort your data on your grid view. Okay, so I have created this request, and then whenever the filter text is not empty, then I'm passing that data source request. Then I'm passing the request that we have created, request that we have created to our web API, which is get publisher by name. I'm passing that request in the web API in the controller. In the controller, which is on the server side, I'm catching that in my web API method. And then here also I can use that extension method to handle the filtering. So I'm just saying, take this request extension method and give me my result back, which will give data source result. And in the result, I have data of type publisher to list, and I'm sending it back to my client. In the client, I'm getting it as HTTP response message. And if it's successful, then I'm reading the content and converting into list of publishers, and that's what I'm assigning it to my all publishers. And if I want to change this, if I want to change the filter operator, let's say if I want to say ends with, it's that easy to just change the operator to ends with, and I can stop, rerun my project. I'm going to refresh my page. And here I have selected ends with operator. And if I select books here, because some of the publishers have books as the last word. So I'm going to select books. And whenever I filter, you can see that it returns all the publisher which are ending with books. And that's how easy it is to use these operators and do filtering, server-side filtering for your list view component. And if I select, let's say if I want to search by source, which is, starts with, it's not going to return anything. And that's how it works. If I click on clear filter, it works fine. So that's how you can use data source request and the extension method to data source result, so that it gets easier for you to filter and sort your list view component. In the next section, I'm going to talk about server-side paging. For enabling server-side paging for your list view component, you'll have to handle OnRead Event, which gets fired when you initialize the component and whenever you change the page of your component. That means we can make a web API call on OnRead Event, which will get data, which will get publishers by page. And then you'll have to also mention the total number of publishers so that your component knows how many pages to show on the screen. So let's go ahead and do that. For that, I'm going to go to my component here, and here I'm going to comment this code. On initialize, I was calling get all publisher, which is getting all the publishers, and we don't want to do that anymore. I'm going to comment that code, and we are not loading anything on initialize. but we are gonna go and handle OnRead event for my list view component. So I'm gonna say we would like to handle OnRead event. We'd like to handle OnRead event on the next line, and I've already written a method which is OnRead Handler, which handles my OnRead event. So let's go to that method and see how that is written. I'm going to go to OnRead Handler, which takes list view read event arguments as parameter. This is what gets passed in the event callback, and I'm passing the page number and the page size to my web API. You can see that we can get the page index and the page size from our list view event arguments, and same thing I'm passing to my web API. If I go to the definition of this method, definition of that method, and then you can see that I'm making a web API call, which is in which I'm passing page index, and then I'm passing page size, and that's how my web API, which says get publisher by page, knows how many publishers should I get back and which page of publisher should be returned back, right? So let's go to our controller and see how that is written. So in our controller, I'm calling get publisher by page, which takes page index and page size. I've added some delay here so that I can mark the database on network connection delay here, and then I'm using the page index and the page size to get correct number of publishers and correct set of publishers so that I can return it back to my client. So I'm getting those publishers by page index and the page size, and I'm assigning it to publisher by page. So we were loading all publishers on initialize, but instead of that, we are going to load publisher by page whenever we initialize the component and whenever we change the page. So let's go ahead and assign this publisher by page to our component now. So I'm going to go to my component. Instead of assigning all publisher, we would like to assign publishers by page. And then we'll have to also tell, like I said, we'll have to tell our list view component how many total publishers are there, so that we can, so that list view component knows how many pages to show, right? So to get total number of count, I have called a method which is get total count, a non-initialized method, and I've assigned it to one of the properties of my component, which is total count. And this total count, which is total count of publisher, I'm assigning it to parameter of my list view component, which is also total number of count. So I'm going to say total count is equal to total count, and that should tell my list view component how many pages it should show. The last thing that I want to change is I want to go to the footer template. We are not loading total publishers now. We are loading total counts. So we will have to assign total count here, and that will get populated on the bottom of the page. Let's run this and see how this is working. I'm going to rerun my project. I'm going to make this bigger so that I can show you the server call. And then I'm going to go to my browser. I'm going to refresh the page. And you can see that even if we were not calling, um, uh, we were not loading all publishers on initialize method, it is still showing the first 5 set of publishers on my list view component. And whenever I click on the second page, you can see that it's making that web API call. It's making that web API call, and there's that delay, which is, which we are trying to show the server side call. And every call, it will try to go to server and bring in data, bring in only 5 publishers and show on my page. One thing that I want you to notice is that my filtering won't work because it doesn't really know how many items are actually there and what's the page size or how many pages are there. But we can totally handle that by using data source requests that we learned about in the previous section. So you can pass, if I hit comma here and press control space, you can see that it takes page size, skip. So you can pass these parameters on the server side and also handle filtering with server side paging. That is also there. I'm not gonna get into that, but that is you can also that is also possible. Yeah, that's all about list view component. I'll see you in the next slide. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me on Twitter, or you can send me an email at curiousdrive@gmail.com. Just make sure that you're mentioning this hashtag so that I know which video that you're talking about. Or you can ask questions in the comment section. We'll be very happy to answer those questions. And if you haven't, please go ahead and try Telerik components. It's been fun making videos for them. This is Fahad. Thank you so much for watching this video. Bye.